Welcome to tonight's program with Inform at the Commonwealth Club. We are very excited to be here tonight.
Very excited. Sure. We are recording this for our podcast, The Stoop.
We are. I'm Hana Baba. This is Leela Day, and we co-host The Stoop. If you don't know what that is, this is a good chance to, go on and subscribe and listen to our episodes. We bring stories from across the Black diaspora. Things that we need to talk about that we feel like are not talked about enough. And so definitely check it out. But today we are very excited to be with Mr. Darnell Moore and talk about your new book, No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. And tonight's event is also part of the Commonwealth Club's Pride Month celebrations as well. So,
yes.
So today we're gonna do something that maybe has not been done before on this stage. We're gonna conduct this like a Stoop episode. And so a Stoop episode, the idea is that it's like sitting on the stoop, on the front stoop of your house, right? It's just like that casual, frank, honest conversation that you can only have with your friends, your family, your neighbors. So are you up for that?
I'm up for it. So I live in Bed-Stuy, so this is what I know. I feel at home on the
Do you
stoop.
have a stoop in Bed-Stuy?
I do.
Nice.
Oh, there you go.
I'm always on my stoop with
Nice.
with people and wine and other types of liquor.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay. And so we want to start this off with a quick, fire round of questions.
Okay.
And just a yes or no.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, I can do this.
Or the correct answer.
Okay.
Oh, right. Has anyone told you sound white?
Never. No.
No.
Okay.
These are kind of built on episodes of The Stoop,
yeah.
so you might want to go back and listen to these episodes.
Do you know where you fall on the hair chart?
Oh my God, the hair chart?
The hair chart.
Black. I don't know. I don't. Curly, wavy.
Okay.
Okay. Diggable Planets or Tribe Called Quest?
Tribe Called Quest.
Oh.
Tribe Called Quest.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
Luther Vandross or Anita Baker?
Oh my, come on.
I told you.
Damn.
I had to ask it. I know.
Luther Vandross.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I know.
And you have one last one, Leela, that I honestly have no idea about, so you go ahead.
Murray's or Carefree Curl?
Oh my God, Murray.
Yes.
Murray's keep the waves real tight.
Right? Okay. Yeah, we had to ask you these things because we're all from the same era.
Yeah.
We were talking about
We're
this.
within, I think, 3 years of each other. We won't say the years,
We're all in our 20s.
but we're all in,
I'm not ashamed. I got gray in my beard. I think it's very obvious.
And so I think we want to start off by asking you about your boyhood and Black boy joy.
I knew my beard would be an accessory that would be in the way.
What brought you joy as a boy?
What brought me joy? So one of the things that was most surprising to me is that I had totally forgot that I smiled as a child. And it wasn't until I was looking at my mom's photos of me, and very much akin to what I'm wearing now. I had socks that came up to my knees, you know how it is, with the stripes on them, short shorts, I'm on big wheels, and I had this really big smile that matched my really big bifocal glasses. But as an adult, I really forgot the little boy that smiled a lot. If only because, traumas has a way of blocking out some of the freshest and most vibrant memories. I remembered a lot of the harsh things that I had endured, but I didn't remember the smiles. But as a child, I was very jovial. I mean, I made mud pies with my cousins that I ate sometimes. I played a lot. I have a very big family, so we had a tribe, and we played games, hide-go-seek. And, I was a teacher. We played like teacher and student. I was a teacher all the time, of course, with my big glasses on. We played church. How do you play church?
How do you play church? How do you play
But
church?
we played church, and I was a preacher. I was a pastor, of course. But what was interesting, I mean, a prologue of the book opens up with me revisiting the scene of me sitting on my bed as an adult who totally forgot all of the joy. Because, and looking back, I kept thinking, how in the world did that little boy smile and laugh and play games and make life in the midst of all the desperation, in the midst of so much violence? And isn't that what kids tend to do? Young people have this capacity to smile their way through and to joke their way through so much harshness. I will say something about Black childhood that I think is worth commenting on. To talk about Black boy joy, it's a remarkable thing, if only because Black kids are not allowed to be children. And I say this all the time, like, we are not allowed to have childhoods. You know, how many times have you heard Black, folk refer to Black kids, be a man? I'm like, I'm 10. Let me play with my He-Man and She-Ra toys. I'm not trying to be a man or thinking about what manhood is. And there's one scholar who talks about accelerated childhoods when it comes to Black youth. That is, we are not really allowed to be kids. It is why a police officer can be in Cleveland and see a 12-year-old boy playing in a park whose name is Tamir Rice. And instead of seeing a kid, they see what? A target. Someone who they think has the potential to do them harm, and they shoot the 12-year-old to death.
They don't see the child.
They don't see a child. So I'm grateful for the childhood that I had, and I'm grateful for remembering the little boy that I was, the one that had the smile.
In the picture.
Oh, and it's all those nerdy pictures in the book. Oh my gosh.
They are so great.
They're really good pictures.
I blame my publisher.
So let's get into the book. This is how you describe it in a promo, if I can just read it. What happens to the Black boys who come of age in neglected, heavily policed, and economically desperate cities that the war on drugs and mass incarceration have created? How do they learn to live, love, and grow up? Where should they turn when history rejects their very existence? Can you comment on that? This is the focus of your book.
I'm laughing because I'm like, I wish I had written those words. That was my publicist, I think. But so much of the book is about, the title is No Ashes in the Fire, and it's a way of me speaking to a very specific incident I endured. We'll probably talk about that at some point, but also a metaphor for Black life. Black people within the context of the United States are perpetually living in the midst of fires. America, if you will, is a fire that we live in and we survive through. White racial supremacy and anti-Black racism and sexism and misogyny and patriarchy and antagonism to folk who are different sexually and by virtue of their gender. These are like the types of fires that are perpetually at work trying to take us out of here, and it succeeds sometimes. But you know what's remarkable about Black life and Black people? We laugh, we create family, we build community, we respond to our callings, we go about life, and we do work that fulfills our souls, and sometimes work that does not, even in the midst of the fire. Almost like that sort of biblical text, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like for the sort of Holy Ghost rulers in the room. Like, here's this text that was all about these three little boys who were alive in a fire. And what that text is really saying, it really isn't about the strength of the boys. And that's what I want to say. Black people shouldn't have to be so strong that we have to constantly extinguish our fight against the thing that is trying to take us out of here. It is a critique that we live despite the thing that constantly attacks us. And that is crucial. And I say, I lift up Amy Cox, a cultural anthropologist and a sister friend of mine, who says resiliency is the wrong frame to talk about Black life. Because resiliency is all about this sort of way to say, y'all so strong. You get back up after you've been knocked back down. You get back up again. And it fails to critique the thing that's knocking us down. So it is all about, this book is an exploration of what it means to live given those conditions in the midst of these fires that should not be set in the first place.
Despite of the fires.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that we wanted to have you do is actually read a passage from the book talking about this strength that you always felt like you had to have and being told to be, be a man, stand up, do your thing. But there's this beautiful passage here, and I'm hoping you could share it with us.
Sure. I love it. I have like a start and end. That is like, now that's how you prepare for a reading. Like so many black boys who would grow up to love and lust after other boys, I would have died had I not found safety in my imagination. I maneuvered through my days smiling, even as I suffocated in a world that refused to let me breathe. Early on, I learned how to protect and nurture my desire for same-sex intimacy long before I began searching for touch in eerie parks and strangers' beds. I was terrified and stimulated by the sparks that charged my body when I was in the presence of certain black boys. My boyhood crushes would never know how I conjured impossible romance dreams in which black boy affection was ordinary. I landed over and over in the arms of the type of black boys who protected me in dreams but harmed me in real life. The boys I would later end up hurting too. I was attracted to what I could not have and to what I wanted to be: straight, masculine, athletic, and attractive. Wait, I should have kept the attractive part out. Had to. I just had to. This particular boy was the model, the acceptable boy on his way to becoming the black man other boys would emulate. So I dreamt him into existence, and he became the type of black boy I wanted to love. And in my fantasies, I imagined the kind of attraction I knew could exist, but was concealed in public. I only wanted what other black kids seemed to experience during their teen years. Other kids like my sisters and cousins would run home out of breath just to make sure the anticipated phone call from a crush wasn't missed. And after the call, while their eyes still sparkled and butterflies flitted in their stomach, mom, dad, older cousin, little sister, aunt, or friend would ask about the youthful love, remembering for themselves how each minute away from a crush turns into long, agonizing hours. Who is she? How does he look? You mean a light-skinned one? Y'all boyfriend and girlfriend? Some kids, with the gaze of ecstatic optimism on blushed faces, responded to the queries with truth. But I never had answers. And when I did, I lied, because I was always asked the wrong questions, if I was asked any questions at all.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And now I would like, actually, I have something else for you to read as well.
Okay.
Just because I feel like what you just read sort of explains where you were later in your life.
Sure.
And I kind of wanted to connect that to your relationship with your family, which is where you started the book.
Yeah.
And this scene with your father.
I stepped cautiously into the steamy bath water. It was the first time I stood in the presence of my father when he was naked, which actually made me forget about how much I hated washing. It was mystifying to stand in a bathtub bare before the man who often veiled his deepest emotions and used the force of his physical power to dominate the spaces he moved through. I stared at him as he stood uncovered, more vulnerable and more self-possessed than I had ever seen him. He was 23 years old at the time, younger than I am now, but he was a father who was raising children. I can barely care for myself at 41, this says I'm 42, employed and relatively well paid, and cannot imagine all the tools he needed and lacked to properly care for my siblings and me. Get all the way in the water. Stop being scared. You got to learn to clean your whole body, especially behind your ears and under your balls. He instructed me firmly, but with care and amusement as we squeezed our bodies into the tub. When we sat down, he moved his hand over mine. Together, we grabbed the soapy wash rag and moved it across my neck, behind my ears, along my arms, and across my chest. My father gently washed my back as he instructed me on how best to clean the parts that smell the worst when boys play outside all day. My fear of the bath dissipated more and more after each repetition of calm instruction offered amid safety. in the presence of my father, who in other instances used the same hands to do damage. There was a lesson to be learned in the water. Bathing correctly was one lesson, but I also learned how tenderness and violence, care and harm are strange bedfellows. They can coexist in our complex web of human connections, the bad always canceling out the good until the good that we are able to express smudges away the traces of evil even the best of us are prone to mete out. Looking back, I no longer see a young black father who was the totality of recklessness and lovelessness. I see a human being, a young black man struggling to transform what he otherwise used as weapons into instruments of care. His hands, his strong and soft hands, were the source of contradiction in my youthful mind. His hands, his human and fragile hands used gently and violently, now symbolize the complexity I too carry within and negotiate as an adult. In the water, we received instruction.
I was crying in my almond latte when I read that in a cafe in Bed-Stuy a few weeks ago. It was just absolutely touched something in me. And I think it was because, we talk about this a lot on the Stoop too. It's just this feeling of not knowing love and touch from your father, from a male figure. You had this connection with your father, this moment that you wrote about, but the relationship with your dad was not always very tender.
Yeah, and that's why I actually wrote about this capturing this image was really important for me, because on one hand, I could have told the story, which would have been one-sided, about my father who I witnessed most of my life brutally physically attacking my mom to the point of near death. And I made a choice to sort of wrestle with his complexity and to try to narrow, at least to write him as a character who was fully human. And two things happened that helped me to get there. One, he died while I was writing the book. Death has a way of helping even the worst of us to transcend pain and hurt. On his deathbed, I encountered someone who I finally realized was a kid who had a kid. It didn't occur to me all this time that, I would always say, my parents, it was cool when I was growing up, my parents are mad young because they looked real young, and But it never occurred to me until I was writing the book and I had to write down that my dad had me at 15. And I was like, whoa, what the hell does a 15-year-old know about raising a kid when he's a kid? Who taught him to know what he knows about boyhood, about manhood, about fatherhood? What were the lessons that he learned? And when I started thinking about that, it wasn't that I didn't want to hold him accountable for his actions, but I understood more clearly, in a more expansive way, how he came to be the boy that he was. The other thing is, when I was talking to my mom, who is the beneficiary of his violence, who had every right to hate him, who could have said, I'm not going to the funeral, who could have said, don't dignify this man in his death, said to me, after I asked her, how did you come to a point of not hating him? And she's like, well, because I've known him all my life. We've been friends since we were kids. He stopped going to school in 8th grade. She stopped in 10th grade. They had a kid. And she said, the same person that who did this damage is the same person that saved me when I was almost sexually assaulted. When I was a kid, he slept in my backyard every night and protected me and got beat up by the person that tried to assault me, but he slept anyway. When I didn't have food to eat, he would make sure I ate. And I got to see a fuller version of him, which is not to say that she was ready to say, I forget what he did. And I was just like, wow. If my mom, who was able to sort of love him and hold him accountable, if she was able to do that, then certainly I could. So had I finished the book, which is what I thought I was going to do before he died, it would have been a different book. I would have been I actually would have been mad at myself because the wrestling with his complexity and not, and another thing too, I was for so long I lifted him up as the monster that I just wanted to be totally opposite of, and that made me feel better about myself, because I'm like, as long as I'm not him, I'm good. You know, I'm like, my worst ain't close to his. Until I discovered that, and looked in the mirror and realized that pointing him out as the monster was a distraction from self. It kept me from acknowledging the monstrosities within me. Made me feel better about myself as long as I could lift him up as the awful bad guy. He was a human being who did some bad shit, but he did some good things too. It's like so many of us. So I'm grateful for the transformation I experienced in having to write him in the book. I even dedicated the book to him. And just so you know, like I always said, I'm not sure I can. In fact, before he died, I would say, you know, because they have this saying, I'm the oldest son, you're supposed to speak at the funeral, and I would say, I don't know what I'm gonna say, so don't ask me. I ended up eulogizing him. Actually, my friend Deneen was there, and was quite surprised at my ability to sort of locate the words. I actually dedicated the book to him. That's y'all. If y'all don't believe God real, a son. Like, I was like, okay, like, that got to be a force bigger than me. To be able to see him as a full person who I could say, you did wrong. You hurt us. You ought to ask for forgiveness. And we're letting the weight go.
The women in your life.
Oh, they're everything.
Protected you. You said you had a big family, and all of those women in your family protected you. Can you talk about the place of women in your life growing up?
So, you know, I talk about coming to sort of like a pro-feminism. And it wasn't, well, it is because I've read dope folk like Audre Lorde and June Jordan and Combahee River Collective, but far before I had access to those texts and language, I was raised by Black girls. And to be clear, my mom had me at 16. She was the second oldest of 8, which means everybody else under her was close to me in age. And they were like, you can tell me nothing wrong about my eyes, baby. Like, they are like everything to me, like taking me skating. And I mean, they literally protected me. I come from I shouldn't say this, but whatever. I come from a family, like, you know, we grew up in the hood. Like, you don't pick with their nephew. Like, they will fight a police unit if they had to.
And that's love.
It's love. Yeah. That's Black radical love. Like, that's why I don't use the term ally to this day. I use accomplice. Because I'm like, if you're not ready to go down, like, I'm Barbara like, bruh, I will get arrested out here, okay? You go down, we all going down to protect my kin. That to me brings to mind a true notion of what it means to go hard for those you love. That said, why I celebrate them, I want to name the reason why I came to a consciousness around the many sort of fists aimed at the girls, and I'm saying girls because they were girls, and that's important to name. Black girls in my life who raised me, is because of what I saw them go through. You know, they were hit by the fist of partners and the state. You know, my mom had to stop going to school because she was told she needed to take care of her child. So at 10th grade, she didn't have a choice. You know, I have aunts who have endured the most excruciating types of experiences. But they were the type of family, like, they had each other's back. And they taught me collective care. You know, my mom did not raise me alone. Like, her sisters were like, I got him this day, you got him. I mean... And this is what, you know, all the invisible labor, you know, all of the work that they did so that the boys and men in our families could go off and be boys and men. Like the fact that my mom stopped going to school so she could raise me, a person who would go off to graduate from high school and get a diploma in 3 degrees, while she had yet to get a diploma until the age of 50, speaks so much to the types of the types of struggles that Black girls and women, particularly those who are economically disenfranchised, have to endure. And by telling their stories, what I wanted to do was to be able to give folk a sense of what intersectionality as a material reality looks like without ever using that word. That's what it means. Like my mom walking to the municipal welfare office to get food stamps. And literally the day going, I remember walked into a glass door. I was like, if that isn't a metaphor, or me looking at her paychecks, knowing she was getting up early and coming home late. And I'll sit back sometimes like, how the hell did she do this? How was she making meals? We did not go without eating a meal. You would have thought that we were well dressed. Christmas was abundant, and she made like $3.75 an hour. That is some black girl magic right there. You understand? Like that is not this is not just some shit you get on social media just to talk about. Like, 'cause it's cute. Like I watched these women struggle, and they gave me their last, and I celebrate them. Kudos to them.
Yeah. I mean, you can feel that in the way that you talk about your family in this book. I mean, for me, it was like revisiting those relationships with aunties and people that you just knew always had your back, right?
And taught you
lessons
about life. We were talking earlier today that I was telling you my aunties taught me everything I know about, bathing, how to put on makeup, but also how to carry yourself, how not to carry yourself. You learn a lot.
And don't
from
let
your
nobody say
aunties.
something wrong to you.
Right. Yeah, and that's
love.
That's love. That's love.
And one of the things that you touched on was the title of your book. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that because I feel like that connects to this really strong sense of family and how tight and how they backed you up so fiercely around this time.
Auntie Barbara came to the rescue.
Yeah.
She still does to this day. In chapter 3, I write about an incident that occurred when I was 14, and a group of neighborhood boys, literally one of them was my next door neighbor, another lived a block away, and another lived around the corner, had surrounded me, and I got picked on a lot as a kid. I was very quirky, and a type of quirkiness that would become the thing that I would learn to love about myself. But as a kid, it's the thing that you're picked on about. And people would call me gay, they would call me faggot and sissy. Far before I had a recognition of my attraction to other boys and men. Like I didn't even realize what they were really reacting to was my gender presentation. That said, they jumped me, they physically attacked me, and one of the boys took a gallon of gasoline and emptied it on me. And I watched him with my eyes glazed trying to light a match. And he was 14 or 15. And there was a wind that kept sort of knocking the flame out. So y'all should know I was a very churchy boy. So back then I was just like, God save me. And in many ways the Spirit did, right? But also, my Aunt Barbara came outside. I mean, the other part of
Spirit and Aunt Barbara.
Aunt Barbara was, all I saw
She
was
is
her
a
skinny
spirit.
arms swinging in every direction, okay? I should not glamorize violence or whatever, but she saved my life. Part of what I want to say, though, about that story is, and this is me speaking about it in retrospect as an adult who has trained to be a clinical counselor, has someone who has spent years trying to heal from a range of things, but also working with other people to heal. So I'm able to talk about this from that perspective. The reason why I wrote the story wasn't necessarily so I can sort of spectacularize this violent moment. And in fact, I often hate talking about it because it's the first thing that people often start with because they want to know, don't you hate those kids? Where are they now? And they want to hear me say they're in jail and I hope that they're rotting somewhere. But that's not how I feel. Partially because I know that, and in the book, and you've read this, you know that I take time to talk about OB, who was a person that did that to me. And I wondered what was happening in his life at 14 or 15, such that he would be inspired, if you will, to take the life of a peer. So I saw OB. I knew his family. I was very close to some of the folk in his family, and they suffered. They didn't have a lot. I don't know what happened behind the doors, but I know he also lost a lot of folk very young, like I did. I also sensed that much of the antagonism he was experiencing towards me had so much to do with some of the unsettling issues that was going on within himself. I don't know who harmed him, right? I don't know what his life world was, but by the time I finished writing the book, I was searching him out online. You know why? Because I wanted to make sure he wasn't in jail. I wanted to make sure he wasn't dead. I wanted him to be alive and free. You know why? Because jails don't fix the heart. Prisons can't do for him what community and love and care can. Transformative justice does not come by way of punishment and retribution. Not when the prisons are eating up our people every goddamn day. I don't want to see that brother in jail, and I damn sure don't want to see him dead. I want to see him alive and well. And I kept thinking, if there was an intervention at his age at that time, what might that look like, such that he would not have done that to somebody else? It doesn't look like, us having to go and call the police on him. What I dreamt is that we're sitting down and having a conversation and acknowledging that what he did hurt me psychically and physically, and ask him why. So the reason the part of that story is really an attempt to get us to think differently, or at least if it didn't get the reader to think differently, it was an attempt at me working through my politics. I totally believe in abolition of the very forces that do us harm. And I'm not going to rely on them to fix us. And I'm like, if I'm going to preach that, I have to practice it. And that's what I wanted to do. So I honestly don't know where he is. And that haunts me a bit, believe it or not. We have this sort of strange connection. And I often wonder, does he think about that moment? But I think about him. And in so many ways, that's what Black radical love is. It's the refusal to dispose of us, of each other in a world and a system that is at the ready to dispose of us from the time we get here, far before we even get here. Don't do to each other what the system does to us. And that's what I wanted to practice with him.
Right.
And through these stories, just piggybacking off of that idea, you do tell stories. We learn so much about education and housing and criminal justice at the time in the 80s and the 90s through these stories of your family and yourself and your boy crushes and OB. How important was it for you to kind of lay out the history of the time in addition to your personal story?
Very. And that's what makes the book I was really concerned about how readers would sit with that, the form. Because it isn't sort of like strict autobiography, like I was born in 1976. And then, go from there. I tried to really contextualize certain points that I felt deserved attention. Because it's not like I don't think the reader is going to come to the story with lacking an understanding. But for instance, to talk about Camden and to give you a description of my city and my streets that I call home. And, if I were to tell you that there was glass all over the place, crack vials, dilapidated homes, it leaves the reader with this sort of almost sympathetic response. Oh, woe is this little Black boy who somehow was an exceptional enough Negro to make it out. I didn't want that. I needed to, I use this sort of metaphor of revealing the unseen hands, these invisible hands that do their best work unseen. And I wanted readers to see that Camden, for example, is only the space that it is because of the processes of ghettoization that made it such. And in doing that, readers have to confront our collective complicities in the making of any of our hoods. Because some readers can look at it like, oh, what was him? What was the little kids in
And
Camden?
that's them over there. That's
But I'm like, oh, baby, we all got something to do with the shapings of these places. All of us. And so it was important to name, like my mom, when she was 16 having me, Ronald Reagan was railing about welfare queens. Oh, I'm going to name that too. Because I need folk to understand and to get that, the sort of struggle was not just at the level of the material. It wasn't just her trying to feed me in a house. She was contending against ideologies. He out here talking about when I'm walking down the streets and law enforcement is sort of increasing, the presence of a law enforcement in my communities, this is when the war on drugs is beginning to happen, that rhetoric. It's one thing to talk about the war on drugs. It's another to not let the reader know that the same people who were enforcing the policies, namely the mayor of the city at the time, first Latino mayor, was arrested. You know why? Because he was one of the biggest drug pushers in the city. So how can we then write and not also include those histories? That was really, really important to me to contextualize a lot of that.
One of the things that I thought about reading this book was the fact that you had mentioned that you knew that there were family members and friends and work friends of people surrounding you that knew that you were gay, but never said anything. And I thought about that because I'm so familiar with the not saying anything.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, like within talking about it, like within the Black community, do you think that hurts us? Why they think it's helping us?
So I always say, Black people are no more homo antagonistic than any other group than the damn country, The thing I will comment on about, so I don't use the term coming out. I don't say that. Because one, I ain't hiding and shit. Like, hell, I got to come out of. Like, if there is a closet, here again, like we put the onus on a person, right, who's on the underside of power to do all the work of naming oneself, of making the people with power comfortable. That injunction really is only about the people with power who want you to name yourself as different. It has nothing to do with the personhood of the one who's naming oneself. So I don't say coming out. I say inviting in.
Nice.
Because it reframes. It's a semantics game, but I think it works. It's a powerful reframe because it centers the power back on the person, on any of us to name our life worlds, our expressions on our own terms. Like when somebody come to your house and they knock at your door, like it's your house, they're knocking at your door, you're standing at the door behind it. You make a decision to let them in or not, based on the fact if you feel safe with them, if you know them, if you have a relationship. I'm not going to open my door if you're knocking on it and come out of my house. The hell? It's my house. This is my house. This is my life. This is my house. This is my life. This is my house.
I let you in.
I let you in. It's an act of hospitality. But here's the thing about that. Hospitality works in both directions. So when I told her that I had a boyfriend, and she laughed pretty much, was like, ha, 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 I knew that forever. Like, you're late. You're late. I love you. She was like, we've been talking about this for years. I'm so glad you said something about it, It made me think about the point you made about her she did not feel she had the language. She didn't want to say the wrong things. So part of what I say is invitation or inviting in is an act of hospitality for all of us, not just the person who you're waiting to say, I'm queer, I'm gay, no, it's an invitation to start a conversation when you feel your heart is moving you to have one. And any of us can sort of act on that impulse. Mm-hmm. I think that's a wonderful thing. So I imagine that so many kids who fear rejection, if only the people in their lives who care about them went to them and said, I care about you. I love you, actually. Let's start there. I love you. Nothing you can say to me can change that.
Is that something you heard growing up?
You know what? We didn't hug a lot. I come from a really caring. They show love. We are like a hard family. We hug now though, and we say things like "I love you" now. But growing up, we didn't do none of that. Like,
Right.
I come from a family you don't cry if you hurt. Like, I don't know if y'all know, but
Boy or
like
girl?
nobody cried.
Nobody cried.
I'm like, wait a minute. Like, did we not just experience like all that trauma last night? Like, why is nobody like showing any signs of pain? Like, but isn't that what so many black people learn to do? You get back up. And then as an aside, part of what I tried to do in this book is to lay bare like a self and to be vulnerable as a way to say to my family, like, it's okay to not be fucking okay. Like, it's okay to say we are not okay. That we hurt. That when I watched such and such happen to Aunt Arlene, like that thing did me in. That I don't have the language to articulate the pain that I'm feeling. That I need help. That I want to cry. I need a hug. It's okay to say those things. So interesting, and we can do that now, but no, I didn't hear that. When my mom, though, looked at me at 28 and said, I love you, and you are my son. And there is nothing you can do to change that. And anybody who can't be in your life that loves you as hard don't need to be there, including the church. My mom said that. And you could not tell me I was in the shit. Like, I was like, what's up? Like, I'm ready to conquer the world. Because my mama, who had me at 16, who does not have a high school diploma, who people think don't have a politic, who they would say are most likely to be more homophobic because she's living in the quote unquote hood. My mama, my black mama, looked me in the face and said, I see you and I love you. And that's important. Because while so many of our, folk may not have the language, she didn't know what, and let me tell you this, not only did she say that, my mom does not drive to this day, she has my license. So that means I live 2 hours away by public transportation on train. She got on a train the next day because I was giving a keynote somewhere. She knew that my partner at the time, Shane, was going to be there, and came after work. She ain't say much for the first 2 hours. She was sitting there like this. And I was like, Shane, trust me, that means she like you. Cause like, but she was there. She was there. And wow, like she demonstrates. They taught me what it means to love. And even if we didn't say the word, love was felt. And I'm grateful for it.
So you brought up the church, and you are a person who has studied Black religiosity. And why do you laugh?
Because I got suspended from ministry when I was in seminary. In seminary.
But
How
you're
ironic.
somebody who thinks about that, it feels like. So first of all, what's your relationship like with the church?
So I am not a member. How can I? So it isn't really complicated. I mean, I'm a minister. Some people refer to me as a minister still. I preach sometimes.
I've seen
and
that,
asked.
yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
It's a very different type of preaching than I used to do.
Well.
I'm like, he preaching Black liberation up in here. It's different. Anyway, so I would name myself a spiritual, as someone who isn't religious in the way that I'm tied to institutionalized church. And I take religion seriously. I take religiosity seriously because of the way that it shapes us, or it can. And so often we're talking about like the political ramifications that are structuring our social lives, but we don't really take seriously the theologies that do too. Even if we are not churched, are part of the church. So much of our laws, policies, our understandings about manhood and womanhood are so deeply shaped by religiosity that it behooves us to investigate that. So, to be quite frank, I mean, a big part of my suicidal ideation, to name that as a fact of my life, had everything to do with the theologies that I had, the messages that I had received from behind a pulpit. I really believed God hated me, and I loved God. Think about that.
How do you live with that?
Oh, well, that's
with that
I did
thought?
not want to live. I did not want to live. Because I would look in the mirror and go, how in the world am I giving all of this energy to a God I cannot see? Who I love with all my heart, so much so that I'm going to flagellate my flesh, my desires, kill my desires, and therefore kill parts of my humanity and my spirit. I'm going to get in prayer lines and pray the gay away, and to spit is foaming out my mouth. I'm going to believe in the lie that I am a sinner, that I have a demon in me, that I need to be exorcised. Like, I believe that for the love of a God I cannot see. And that shit had me taking pills. I would leave church services, high praise, saying, God, I love you. Lord, I praise you, and go home and try to kill myself. And you know what? That is so common. It is so common. And that's not just in black churches. And I had to sit across from folk after having, so before I should tell you, I went to get a degree in clinical counseling before I got the theology degree. Because I need to get right, okay? And I would sit in front of folk who would go to churches and they dancing and running around the aisle and doing all of this for their churches and for this God, and say to me, I don't want to be here. So I wanted to name that in the book. That was a very real struggle. Like, I remember, like, I got so far removed from the church. At one point, I was in seminary, and in order to graduate, you have to like do supervisory work in the church. And they're like, Darnell, you cannot not do supervisory work in the church, and you're in seminary. I was like, don't you send me to no church. I ain't going to no church. And I went to a research office. But the church I did make it to, the pastor, Reverend Daniel Meter, who was also a theologian.
I'm sorry. I just need to tell everybody that that Q&A is going to be in 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Think about your questions. Think about what you want to ask.
But I'll just end here. He said to me, we were walking during our supervision, and he said, Darnell, I want you to say that I am gay and God loves me. And I said, what? I grew up very Pentecostal, apostolic, like Holy Ghost roller. And I was like, I can't say that. And he's like, yes, you can. Say it. And I said, I am gay and God, I am gay and God loves me. He's like, say it louder. And I was like, I am gay and God loves me. And I felt like such the heathen. And this is like after like studying theology, but I'm so grateful for him. Just for helping to sort of like reframe and to do away with what I call theologies that kill, and replace that with what I call theologies that heal. So kudos to Daniel Meter.
All right. So, time went by so fast.
Did.
We need more time with you.
I know.
We have to stoop this out with you one time on the podcast.
Come to Real Soup, like on Vestai. I'll have wine, Hennessy, and pineapple juice. I ain't that far from Camden. Don't get it twisted.
Okay, so now we're going to audience Q&A. As always, keep your questions short.
You can
and
raise your
ending
hand.
with a question. Please be brief. And
Okay,
I think staff will cue you to the microphone. Is that right? Yep.
Don't be shy.
Raise your hands if you want to
Got
ask a
somebody
question.
right here for you.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. My name is Carol, and I'm the host of the C-Dub Show podcast. Hopefully, you guys can all check the podcast out. I had a question. We had an opportunity to interview the creators of The Boy Doc, which is a documentary about black female masculinity.
Sure.
And you talked a lot about masculinity and what you learned, from your father and growing up as a male masculine. And what I'm kind of learning is that there's a construction of just queer masculinity in general. Can you speak a little bit to what it is to be a child who already knows or kind of feels that they are queer and kind of constructing that masculinity with no one to really teach you about queer masculinity? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, I think in the book, I there's a line that says something along the lines of queerness is magic for those who, I think, learn how to possess it. And queerness, I think, is a remarkable term to use, partially because it's not only a term that is indicative of one's sexual mores, your attractions. It's about really ameliorating or erasing all of the sort of boundaries, the boxes, breaking through the cages that keep so many of us imprisoned, that limits our full personhood and our humanity. And what I know now is that the me that was the boy that was so exploratory, who was not afraid to dance and dreamt about being on stage, performing next to Prince, by the way, who
It's the only way to do it.
who actually saw in Prince a type of freedom at a very early age, who sang and had a high voice, and who didn't, and you learned to sort of contort my voice in such a way that it could sound beautiful, who really like fundamentally was free in a sort of way. That little boy went through life socialized to become a hardened boy. So the reason why the pictures are in the book, because you can sort of see changes. There was a me that was smiling, very quirky, and then there's a me that's like this by 17. Gold chains on. I mean, that was part of my performances too. I appreciate those moments. But I could see how the masculinity that I was being pushed towards was one that was bereft of a type of softness, a joy, creativity that was so present when I was a young person. Now, though, I am actually not attached to identity categories like masculinity or manhood, if only because I know that those identity categories can be cages for so many of us. Who created them and why? Rather than ask what it might mean to be a freer or better man, I say, what might it mean for me to be a better human being? And that's what I am in anticipation of. I don't necessarily want to jump in a cage or in a costume or in a sort of expression that in so many ways is a colonial vestige that had been created for who? For what? And that is not to say there isn't freedom for some, but it certainly hasn't been for me. So now it's so funny, like when people are like, how you identify? I'm like, Darnell? You know what I'm saying?
Like which box?
Because I don't want the box. Mm-hmm. Keep the boxes. What I want is freedom. So I don't know if that gets, but yeah.
All right, who's next?
I think to our moderators here who want to continue talking, I could ask you a million questions. My question is around the idea of why did you decide this was the time to tell your story? And who do you feel like you're telling your story for?
Perfect questions. Why is this the time? Well, I'm a writer, and, we're always writing our stories. This just happened. The book, the iteration that's here now is not the book I started writing 3 or 4, maybe more years ago. I find myself, we're probably writing multiple projects all at once, right? I did not intend to write a memoir. I didn't want to write a memoir. I thought it was too narcissistic and grandiose and but the readers and people in my life would go, oh my gosh, but the stories are so compelling. And I think you can actually get to people's hearts if you can write a really good narrative in ways that some of the theoretical work you're trying to do or the cultural criticism may not be able to do. I would love to say that it was like perfect time, and I knew Trump was going to become president, so we did a book about Black freedom. It was not even that. I wasn't thinking about Trump. In fact, the white gaze was so far away from my optic. In my mind, I had constructed like this theater, and in it was like this little quirky Black boy with like knots in his head, with glasses on, 16 years old. That was a representation of my 16-year-old self. That's it. And that's who I wrote to. And I kept thinking, if some 16-year-old, however they identify, and who might be living under some harsh conditions can get this book in their hand, and read words that I needed at 16, they may not have to go through 2 decades of hell. They may not be thinking about what they need to do to take themselves out of here. They may, at that day, at 16, look in the mirror and live the type of life I should have and could have been living at 16. And that's who I wrote it for. So I get quite surprised when other people, I tell the story all the time. It's funny. I hope y'all think it's funny too. So the lawyer who was reviewing the book to make sure I don't get sued because, it's writing about people, said to a white woman from Texas, I have thoughts about Texas. And I was like, you told me from Texas, you're a white woman, and you from Texas? I was like, oh. No shade. Y'all get what I'm trying to say. And I assumed she was straight. And she said to me, first, before I go through my notes, I just want you to know how fantastic this book is and how much it touched me and how much of myself I saw in it. And I swear to you, I said, what? Because I was like, you were not in my theater in my head. Like, I ain't see you. And I laughed because it really taught me about the power of art. And so often, folk are like, aim for the universal, which is what somebody told me. Mm-hmm. But good artistry is very specific and singular sometimes. And I am so glad that I honed into a very specific place, a people, a specific time, that I set a very specific audience in my head. And writing that way, I think, opened up the expanse so that folk could find even the universal in that specificity. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that was the audience that I was writing to, because that's inevitably who I wanted to be proud.
We deal with that a lot on our podcast. We have to talk about audience all the time. Who are we talking to?
Yeah.
Who are we?
How do you manage that?
Who are we writing to? It's complicated. It is complex. We know the majority of listeners are, white public radio listeners, but we want to talk about very Black stuff.
And we do. I think that's how we manage it. We just
right.
But that's why people listen.
Yeah.
And we keep getting emails from people whose first line is, "Dear Stoop ladies, I want you to know I am white and I am loving this podcast. I am learning so much." How many emails have we gotten like that?
Yeah.
And so it is reaching the people that we didn't think we would be reaching.
Yes.
And they're benefiting from it as well in another way. But our intention was not that group.
But notice how we have to be. I'm so glad this turned into a conversation.
Sorry.
No, this is so good but notice how we are never really asked to question the sort of specificity of whiteness and the way it's like everything I ever read from K to 12 was about white life. No one ever said, aim for the universal. Right. Because whiteness is automatically deemed the universal. And that's what they mean when they say aim for the universal. I had to figure out what love meant for me by reading Romeo and Juliet or 1984 or Of Mice and Men. No James Baldwin, no Audre Lorde Zombie. No. But all of a sudden I write about Black characters and Black space, and it's like, you might want to expand and invite, what? What? You know where I live? This is America. So I am enriched, especially in this time when there are so many dope, and there are always Black books out. The fact that we don't get access to them, or they're not talked about, is one thing, but it's sort of like this wave of Black memoir coming out, right? That is really remarkable to see. This sort of new wave of works coming out, and folk who are unapologetic about centering it in the specificity of the expansive Black life that I think so many people will be able to find themselves in.
And if you don't understand it, look it up.
Google?
Ask an African.
Sorry, that's a reference again to an episode. You have to go to the Stoop podcast and see where that came from. Do we have another question?
There are more
Yes.
questions. We do. We're going to have this one and then just one more and then back to you guys.
Okay.
Darnell, thank you so much for your words and your honesty and your vulnerability. For a little bit of context, the accent is Australian. My dad is African. My mother is Lebanese, so grew up mixed race in white, middle-class Australia. And what you touched on just then has been really interesting for me because my experience is not of Black America, but African culture and being raised as an eldest in a white middle class society. And you talked about the need to like saying it's okay to not be okay. And I'd love your insights into how do you start those conversations with family and friends where it's not okay to say that it's not okay. And your father is representation of someone who is strong and determined and focused, but yet you want to breathe life into that. So your comment.
It's such a good question. I was so concerned about how my family would respond in the publication of this book. So I sent them, they were reading it as I was writing. And my mom said, Darnell, you know, I read very slow. So I'm reading this very slow. And it's a lot. And she's like, I'm covering my eyes at some of this. And I told her, I was like, you're going to learn some things about me that you probably didn't know. Especially the sex stuff. But it is what it is. But surprisingly, she circled back and said that she had blocked out that when she was reading me recounting some of the violence that she had endured, that she forgot them. And what I think she meant is not that she sort of forgot, but that trauma has a way, again, right, of building these walls. My sister, who I share writing with, would send me texts throughout the day as she's reading, and she would just say things like, my eyes are like welling with tears. And thank you so much for being brave enough to say these things. She called me one day and said she had held on, she's 38. She had held on to a secret she hadn't told anyone for all these years, and finally told me because she had felt finally okay to name it. And by sharing it with me, she had begun like a healing process for herself. That being said, part of what I try to do is to practice the vulnerability that I invite them to share in, which is really hard. I say things like, hey, like maybe we should have a family conversation about that period in my life where I was suicidal and you all found out by virtue of a note. And what I've discovered is that it has given them the ability to articulate what is often gone unnamed. So much so that they've been to most of my books. You won't believe, like they sit in the front row of these books. Like we're talking about very personal. They're in the front row, like, So now they're getting a little too healed because now they be calling me like, and let me tell you, and I'm like, okay, like that's for a therapist. Sharing a little too much of the depth.
But that's pride, right?
But that's so much
love.
It's love, and I took on, I just tried to practice the thing that I wanted to invite my family also to embrace, which is hard work, very hard work. And so, yeah.
This will be our last audience question.
Hi, Darnell.
Hi, friend.
Hey. So I posted before and communicated to you just the awe that I feel when I read about the way that you've developed a compassion towards your dad, despite the way that he hurt you and your mom. And I know that you just talked about the ways in which you've humanized him and seen him as a complex human being. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about like the emotional stages that it took for you to get there, and where was there space for anger, and is there still space for anger as you're holding that compassion towards your dad?
Oh, yes. So, I didn't get to that place of sort of like understanding until 2 years ago. So that means for 4 decades, I carried a lot of anger, and I used the word hatred to describe him. And anger, I think anger has its usefulness. So what I did not want to do in the book is to give the impression that it was just like I had this sort of coming to sort of Jesus moment and all was forgiven. I talk in the book about a time where I hadn't seen my dad for years. I come home, I'm out late at night partying in Philly, and I get to the bus hub waiting for a bus to get home, and we have hacks in this. So these are like fake taxis, like people who drive, and they sort of come up to you like, "Hey, brother, you need a ride?" And it was late, and this guy comes up, "Brother, you need a ride?" And I look in the car, and a voice sounds familiar. It's my father. And I hadn't seen him in years. So I had all types of feelings going on in that moment. Like, one, like, where the hell you been? Like, tired of you to show up now, like anger and also excitement. And I'm sitting in the car, and we're talking. He's telling me he's so proud of me. And I'm sitting here thinking, one, I wonder if he's going to ask me where I'm coming from. I was coming from the gay neighborhood. And is this my mic going in like that?
It looks fine.
But we're in the car and we're talking. I get home pretty quick. And in the car, as he's talking, I'm wanting him to say, "I'm sorry." I'm wanting him to say, "I know you saw a lot. You've been with me since I was 15, and you done saw the worst of things." I needed him to say that to me. And you might be mad at me, and I want you to forgive me. I want to acknowledge that I'm wrong. I needed him to say, and I know that I've been absent. And I think his absence had so much to do with the guilt he carried, which probably kept him away. And I needed him to say that. I needed not to be the parent in that moment. And this is me after having gotten a degree in clinical counseling. And I told myself, I am not going to be up in this room. Thank you. This beard. And I'm like, I'm not going to be in this car doing his work for him. And we get to the house, and we get out the car, and he says, "That'll be $10.
Was he joking?
Was he joking?
No. I gave him money. So you want to talk about anger? I think that might have been the next time I saw him after that was at his sister's funeral, and then I eulogized him. And these are years apart. So this is not me telling you that like somehow I just snapped my finger. And when I say that it was a transcendent act, that brought me to the point where I could see him on his deathbed as somebody that was worth love, it really was. And I write about that in the book too, and I hope that people can get that this wasn't easy, and it still isn't. I got mad on his deathbed. I'm like, here you go again. You want to be all unconscious about the transition. I said that. I did.
Now that's anger.
Try to take the easy way out. Got me doing the work. Now I'm sitting here praying with your daughters. But God knows. He taught me. That's real. He taught me so much, even in his death. So, thank you. Thank you all.
All right. So, don't put it down just yet.
Okay.
Don't put it down just yet. And it's time for an informed traditional question that everybody gets asked when they come through here.
Okay.
What is your 60-second idea to change the world?
Oh, come on.
Good luck.
60-second idea, what to change the world. So I often ask, what would a Black libertarian loving future looks like? And to me, it looks like one that is not set up to fix people by way of punishment. One that is not organized around making any of us laborers, where we're asked, what is it that you do? Because people want to know what it is or how it is we make money. But where young people can be taught and ask the question, what is it that you love? Because that's essentially how the world will get better, right? It's a world that is free of economic exploitation, where we're not working so hard to eat, but we're working to feed our spirits. And the very thing that we're doing to feed our spirit is the very thing that can feed our stomachs. So that's what
Let's end with what feeds your spirit.
That was pretty.
What feeds my spirit? So
What feeds your spirit?
I am fortunate to be able to. It took a long time, but I'm fortunate to do work that that feeds my stomach and my spirit. To sort of find that alignment took time. I did a lot. I've worked a lot. 2 decades of a lot of types of work, mostly so that I can do the thing that I loved after I got off of work. Most of that work I wasn't paid for. But I'm fed by love. I mean, small things make me tear up and happy. I was telling somebody I watched once these young people help this elder on the A train, and I was crying. Like, oh, that's so good. Like, look, I like looking at the daddies like reading to their kids, or the sort of what we think are just these mundane acts. These small acts are so big. It's the stuff that you do when people are not celebrating. It's not the spectacular stuff. That's the stuff that makes me happy. Again, like going home to my family and knowing that whether I write a book or not, whether I succeed as defined by an industry or not, they've got my back. And that makes me very happy. I'd never feel alone as long as I got them.
Beautiful.
Darnell
Moore.
Darnell
Oh.
Moore. One more thing that feeds our spirits is your Instagram page and his outfits. If you aren't following
Oh.
Darnell, you got to
These
be
little
following Darnell, who is always looking super fly.
I have been dressing like that for fashion feeds my spirit too. I should say that too.
Yes.
We didn't know what we would be wearing because
We were very conflicted.
we knew we were too stylish for us.
Yes. Like, what is Darnell wearing? Darnell's going to be in the lobby signing some copies of his book. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.